I got involved in an organisation to develop a series of activities for Refugee Week. And I sat on the board. I got to meet a lot of people, the different refugee groups. There's a housing association involved. Gordon Mersel, who was then the Dean of Birmingham, leaders of various refugee organisations. And it was a very, very productive group, and a lot of events were organised. And I made a lot of friends that way. You know, a lot of the planning was what would take place there, who would have stalls, what kind of music acts would take place, what exhibitions and where exhibitions of refugee artists. But it seemed to be a sort of an organisation where people who within refugee communities themselves could come and talk and contribute and make sure that they were involved.
So we had activities like a big map that we made that would go on the ground, and all the kids would, and people could put a ribbon down as to where they came from. So we had all these lines from different countries. But in the early days, it was quite sort of makeshift. We had a tent, got people together, we filled it, and just, kids, they love doing all sorts of stuff. So as long as it was interesting and exciting, they do it. And then when the Schools Festival came, the Schools Festival was much more formal. So we had like 23 schools at one point. So we'd have 23 schools, nearly 500 kids. It was to raise awareness. It was that basic. What is a refugee as opposed to an immigrant, for example? What is specific about a refugee? And we did quite a lot of that with the schools.
So back then in education, there used to be a whole out of hours learning agenda, so extracurricular learning outside the school day. And because the project was to engage refugee and asylum seeking children, the project was actually called the Extended Learning Project for Newly Arrived Families. And it was across primary and secondary school. So it didn't really use the word migrant or refugee asylum. Newly arrived families could be from anywhere, but it was clearly about refugee and asylum communities. And we would work in partnership with schools to put on, it might be a 6-week music program or a 10-week this or whatever, but all the work we used to do used to lead to developing educational resource, translated as well, to welcome new families. And then Celebrating Sanctuary would put on stalls and music and activities. The teachers would bring classes in. I'm sure it was at least 500 and above.
The festivals that took place in those early years were bigger than anything that happened post 2010. It made it feel much more a city event, and I would always say we had the through flow of people who would not normally engage with Celebrating Sanctuary. That for me was the pleasure of it. I remember it was arguably the Kurdish music that got everybody dancing in a circle, da-da-da like this. Often the men folk, but then some of us women folk joining as well. We had the music happening, and it really was diverse as I remember it. There was African, there was Iraqi Kurdish I've talked of. But what struck me about it was that it went fairly smoothly.
As I remember, first time when I arrived Birmingham in 2002, Celebrating Sanctuary was the first organization to hold my hand, to give me opportunities to be a musician again, to give me the platform to show my talent and skills again, provide network to meet very important artists from different backgrounds. So many training courses and workshops were very important to build my skill and my abilities. I remember in 2003 for first time, I played at Refugee Week in Birmingham with some of my Kurdish musician friends. And after that, every year we participated in Refugee Week. And beside of that, I was running Middle Eastern music and dance workshops as well for community centers and schools around the West Midland. When I got to Victoria Square. I remember my first gig.
So my first memories are of celebrating sanctuary performances actually in this very space, and you know how exciting it was to have musicians from all over the world. A few years went by, and then I was approached by the board of Celebrating Sanctuary to join them, and you know I felt very proud actually to have been asked, and to be more involved. There are so many performances that sort of occur to me as highlights in our program, but the performance perhaps above all in my mind, the one with Didier Casala and the Fro, have been at Icon not that long ago. It was such a privilege to be involved in an organisation growing in the way that it was, to be there sort of watching small alternative organisation develop and increasingly taking its place in the rich cultural life that it's Birmingham.
Well, from what I understood is that Celebrating Sanctuary had been a refugee organisation beforehand and had done a lot of refugee awareness and won the Refugee Week Festival, Schools Project and different things, but arts wasn't their primary focus. And because I'd done this, I was working on this one with Sounded Out, they asked me to come along, maybe help them run some of the music events. There was never anybody with an arts background in Celebrating Sanctuary or with a, music background, but they would run a music events and so I'm coming very much from a musical perspective and increase the quality of the music. My opinion was to support professional musicians. That's the remit of the organisation. I thought there's like a lot of these musicians who are here who are from refugee backgrounds who were professional musicians in their own country, and we should enable them to do what they do here.
What makes those events memorable, I think, is more to do with the multicultural gathering, people from different cultural background, but coming from, whether it's a refugee immigrating in the UK. So when those people come together to these events, and some of them also showcasing their talent, their musical tradition, I think that makes these events very memorable. Just those memories, again, is more the sharing, the coming together, and the families, the children, the space that Celebrating Sanctuary creates for all of us, whether, refugees or migrants, in this space, plus people, it's a space where you don't make any difference who is who, because we are all there for the same purpose, which is like to celebrate, life, joy, music. I think those are like amazing work the Celebrating Sanctuary keep doing.
When I met them, I did not know they could support me, but they support me a lot in all of my events I'm doing and all of my kind of workshop I'm doing with the kids. I'm getting support sometimes, which is fabulous. So there's a big growth. Yeah, we had a lot of assistance with Celebrating Sanctuary in that time of 10 years working together. But the main one I remember was when we were first celebrating Congolese Independent Day. So the Celebrating Sanctuary was like, we had a kind of 80% of support from the Celebrating Sanctuary. So they're always giving us the opportunity to celebrate every June when they're doing the event in the summer. But that June month is a special month for us as a Congolese community here in Birmingham. We're celebrating them, and a Celebrating Sanctuary, they're always supporting it.
The first event I remember from Celebrating Sanctuary was at Ort Cafe. We were invited for a gig in a lovely community place. It was a fantastic attendance, very warm welcomed. And it was an amazing place with lots of creative studios around and creative people in the audience as well.
Very grateful to Celebrating Sanctuary for inviting us for several performances, but I think this year performing at Commonwealth Games community setting events was fantastic, as well as a refugee celebration at Mac Centre.
It's amazing that we have this organization who is covering artists like us, which is very in world music, which is quite difficult to fit within the conventional music venues and styles like folk or jazz. It's particularly world music. Artists in this niche need an organization like that to actually feel home. And indeed, celebrating Sanctuary, it does make me feel like home when I play for your organization.
Celebrating Sanctuary make our community introduce this culture. In the Birmingham, there are artists coming from different backgrounds. They are showing the diversity. It make as well people like refugees feel at home. Thank you so much to celebrating Sanctuary, to believing in me, to give me big opportunity in England.
Because I have a few friends from Congo here. They told me about, in Celebrating Century, that they give them gigs and they're really happy, that always includes them with their bands here. So, but then when I met Seed, he then told me kind of probably about what you guys were doing it. So it was more just like word of mouth. I was actually playing in the kitchen garden. That was the first memory, and then it was. I still have the memory of that gig because the audience was just so receptive to the music made on the night. So it stayed in my mind. Birmingham is very multicultural. As soon as you come here, it's very mixed, and you see that definitely from the program of Celebrating Sanctuary for sure. Yeah, it does reflect Birmingham big time.
As an artist, my very first memory with Celebrating Sanctuary was in Ort Cafe. It was called Ort Cafe at the time, and I just released an album, and I was invited to perform with my band at Ort Cafe, and that was quite special, especially as it was like the first time performing with my band in Birmingham, so that was quite exciting. I think it's wonderful that the Celebrating Sanctuary is growing. There's quite a diverse range of artists coming in, new artists coming in, and also established artists as well that they've been supporting. Birmingham is a hugely diverse city, and you look around you, you're on the bus, on the metro, on the train, you're in the grocery store, and it's such a diverse city. And when you go to a Celebrating Sanctuary performance, or you look at the series that they put on for the year or for a season, and you can see that the musicians that they're putting on are reflecting the city, and that's a wonderful thing to see.
What I love about Celebrating Sanctuary, I would say, is the celebrating the artists from different backgrounds, refugee, migrant communities, and also what I learned from them is the collaborating aspect of it, artists not being afraid to work together and to share their art. The audience, how they attract the audience in different venues. It can be the Icon, it can be the MAC, it can be the BMAC, the Library of Birmingham, and different people of different backgrounds are just given opportunity to come and to see different artists of different backgrounds.
So when I heard that Celebrating Sanctuary promotes migrant artists, migrant skills, migrant talents, and they had that opportunity at that time of supporting emerging artists, I thought, yes, this is a chance for me. And I had two amazing mentors, Sandra and Ola. Oh my God. After beating the first hesitation of feeling I wasn't good enough for the project, I then started worrying that I wasn't going to be able to express myself well enough for Sandra and Ola to understand what I wanted to achieve. But they understood me like that, almost as if they could read my mind. So yeah, for a year, they supported me.
The Stories of Hope and Home, one of the things we do is lots of creative writing, and during lockdown particularly we wrote loads of poetry. It sort of happened a bit by accident to start with, but it lent itself well to Zoom, and then partway through that year one of the members of the group said we should publish this, and it was a real kind of testament to their confidence in their own ability as writers. These are not people who describe themselves as poets, they're not people for whom English is their first language, and there was this kind of, this is actually worth celebrating. So we did, so we put it together into a book and self-published it, and then I suppose what Celebrating Sanctuary gave us with Refugee Week was the first opportunity to also turn that into performance and to share it in another way, and it gave people who wanted to be part of that story a way of sharing their words and being heard. So we do school visits and people go in and share their stories in schools, and lots of people love doing that and other people don't, and it was one of those reminders that we all have stories to share, and some of us want to share them with the media, some of us want to share them through campaigning, some of us want to share them through talking to children, and performance is another way of people having their voice heard.
I've been to the one I talked about in the MAC. It was very nice, like the Refugee Week, during the Refugee Week. It was nice, meeting a lot of people, knowing fully well that you're not just alone. You have so many people involved, and knowing that your situation is not just going to end, it will come out positive, being encouraged in so many ways. So
when we write poetry and we discuss social issues that affects us as immigrants, the time when we were performing in front of a large audience and seeing the support of people was just amazing.